Hi, I'm Sarah Turcotte, Community Relations Director for Bridges by Epoch at Westford.
And I'm Erica Labb, Executive Director at Bridges by Epoch at Westford. Welcome to Bridges to Community. Today we're really excited to have with us Michael Steinberg. He is the Director of Business Development at Senior Planning Services, which is a Medicaid application company that assists individuals with obtaining Medicaid benefits as a means to cover the cost of long-term care. Senior planning removes the added stress that families endure during this difficult time, thereby allowing them to focus on what matters most, caring for their loved ones. Michael's responsibilities at senior planning include strategic marketing, development, client relations, sales analytics, and marketing. He's a busy guy, and implementation of all of those. His previous positions as sales and marketing manager for a home care medical equipment company and director of community relations at an adult daycare have provided him with an extensive background in healthcare, and we are so happy to have him with us today. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited to have you on the show today, Michael, because for us, we're happy to inform our audience about something that most families will have to, most families will approach at some point. And it's all about long-term care planning. So there's a lot of different options out there, and I think it would be great if we could start just by maybe explaining to the audience, what are the differences? There's Medicare, Medicaid, Masshealth. Could you just start by maybe explaining some of these differences?
Absolutely. So like I said, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. We really appreciate the opportunity and getting this information out there. The difference between Medicaid, Masshealth, and Medicare, well, first off, Masshealth and Medicaid is the same thing. The word for Medicaid in Massachusetts people use is Masshealth. The difference between Masshealth and Medicare is a federal insurance. So basically, if you are 65 or over, you are entitled to Medicare. Medicare only covers up to a certain amount. For example, somebody goes to the hospital, somebody goes to the doctors, Medicare would cover approximately 80% of the bill. When somebody goes to a rehab or a skilled nursing facility, if they are coming from a hospital, Medicare may cover the bill for 100% of the bill for the first 20 days. After 20 days, Medicare will only pick up approximately 80%. And then after day 100, if somebody is in a skilled nursing facility or in a rehab for 100 days, after that, starting day 101, Medicare no longer covers for that care. So it's really not difficult for somebody to get onto Medicare. Like I said, for the most part, all you have to be is 65 years old and you're entitled to that. Medicaid, on the other hand, which we also call Masshealth, is a insurance. It's kind of like a long-term care insurance that's run by state. It's governed state by state. So every state has their own rules and regulations, and it's a tedious process. But once somebody does get onto Masshealth and they go into a skilled nursing facility, all their bills are taken care of. So Medicaid will cover your room and board, your medication, transportation. You go to the doctors and you have Medicare and Medicaid. You will not be left with any bill at all. So to sum up that question, the difference between Medicare is a federal insurance, doesn't really necessarily cover everything for you. Medicaid is a governed state-by-state insurance. It's partially funded by the federal government, but once you get onto Medicaid, you're basically fully covered in a skilled nursing facility.
And this is a common thing that we see, and I'm sure you see it too, is people get all those terms mixed up, and they think they're all interchangeable. But the Masshealth and Medicaid you're pretty much talking about the same thing when you discuss them, and then Medicare is that skilled benefit that's a little bit different.
Absolutely.
So that's very helpful.
It is.
Yes, many families that we call and speak to, they say, we ask them, do you have Medicaid? And they're like, oh yes, that red, white, and blue card, right? Yeah. And the answer is no, that's Medicare.
Right.
So Medicaid is a whole different animal, and we'll get into that a little bit now.
Great, great.
So can you share with the audience what the general qualifications are to receive a benefit like that?
Like Medicaid, right?
Medicaid.
What's the eligibility like?
So initially, the first lines, so to speak, of eligibility is you need to be 65 years old or permanently disabled. So if somebody is on disability, they wouldn't be entitled to Medicaid even if they are under 65, but you need to be 65 or older, disabled, you need to be a U.S. citizen, and you need to be a resident of in the state of Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
So if somebody has a loved one living in New Hampshire, they can't apply for Massachusetts Medicaid until they actually come over to Massachusetts.
And then how quickly could they apply once they're in the state?
As soon as they come here.
As soon as they have an address.
As soon as they actually move into a skilled nursing facility or even their child's home, they can apply that's their address.
Okay.
Interesting. Now, not everyone's going to qualify for the different benefits at hand. And is there a financial resource limit for the eligibility for Medicaid?
Yes, absolutely. So just before I answer that question, there's one other point from the question before, the basic eligibility requirements. So you also need, if somebody's over 65, they still need to be qualified medically. Okay. Now, even if they're not disabled, so to speak, they still need assistance with their daily livings. It's referred to a lot as ADLs, assistance in daily living. And there's 5 basic ADLs. It's eating, bathing, dressing, help with medication, transferring. So as long as you need help with 3 out of the 5 ADLs, then you medically qualify for Medicaid.
Okay. Can you explain who makes that determination for somebody who does that screening?
Right. So the state nurse will come down and evaluate that patient to see that if they truly qualify. We need to send in the screen with their clinicals, and then they determine if you're eligible for long-term care.
Okay. Which sort of gets, and I don't want to jump ahead, but kind of what you guys really get into helping with. But before we get to that, talk about the difference between someone's assets and income and how that all comes into play with this.
So in order for somebody to qualify for Masshealth / Medicaid, there's 2 criteria. You need to be clinically eligible, which we just spoke about, and you need to be financially eligible. So we'll go with a single individual, because once you get into spousal, in other words, somebody that's married, it gets a lot more difficult. So let's try to keep it simple for the time being.
Sure.
We'll talk about a single individual who is going into a skilled nursing facility. In order for that individual to qualify for Medicaid, his total assets and resources cannot exceed $2,000. Okay. The difference between assets, resources, and income, and that's something very important not to get it confused, because many people, hear out there that they don't qualify for Medicaid because their income is more than $2,000, and that's the furthest thing from the truth, because the asset limit is $2,000, but the income limit, there is no income limit. So the difference between income and assets is something that has a cash value. You can cash it out. So for example, your checking account, your savings account, some life insurance policies, IRAs, these are things that you can actually cash out, as opposed to your Social Security check. You can't cash out your Social Security benefits. Right. It's a benefit that you're getting a check every month for. So that's your income. Income is looked at separately, which we'll get into. Assets is money in the bank, something that you can cash out, and that cannot exceed $2,000.
Okay. Very helpful.
Yep.
That information. No, it is. It's very helpful, that information, because some people
Many people get confused about between the income and the assets. Absolutely. We get that all the time. People like, oh, I don't think I qualify because Dad's income is too high. You know, Dad's income can be as high as you want, as long as it's not higher than the Medicaid rate. In other words, if Medicaid is reimbursing a skilled nursing facility, I'm just using an example, it's not actual numbers. But if Medicaid is reimbursing a nursing facility $6,000 a month and your income is $7,000 a month, then there's almost no point in you applying for Medicaid.
Because you can afford it. You can afford the state.
But yes, people get confused with that all the time, and it's very important to make that distinction between the income and the assets.
Yeah. So how does home ownership fit into this?
So home ownership, we'll stick again with the single applicant. Yep. But just to put some people at ease, if you are married and one spouse is living at home and one needs to go into a skilled nursing facility, if the spouse is living in the home, it's 100% exempt. Okay. It's not counted as an asset. And that's something that we get all the time as well. People call us up and they're panicking. Am I going to lose my home? And the wife is living at home or the husband's living at home, and that's their #1 fear. And they don't even want to talk about Medicaid because they're scared they're going to get thrown out of their house.
Because you hear the ads on the radio, don't lose your house to the nursing home, and so then they're like afraid to ask.
Yes, and that's also a misconception. People always say all the time that Medicaid's going to take away my money and the nursing home's going to take away my money. nobody's taking away your money.
Right.
It's if you want to qualify for Medicaid, you need to get your assets down to $2,000. And Medicaid is not actually going to the bank and taking your money away from you. But getting back
You're
to
able to spend it to get down to that.
Correct. Well, we'll go into what
Right.
you're allowed to spend it on. But yes, you have to spend that down to $2,000. So a home ownership, if a spouse is living in the home.
And only a spouse, not a child, not.
So there are options if a child,
disabled
well,
child.
disabled child for sure. That's
Okay.
a federal law across all states in America that if somebody has a disabled child, and child doesn't necessarily mean somebody who's 18 years old or below
Right.
or younger.
Adult
They can
child.
have a child who's 35 years old. All your assets can be transferred to that child.
Okay.
But just to keep it simple, if a spouse living at a home, the spouse can keep that home as long as it's their primary residence. And if it's a single individual, it is counted as an asset. However, Masshealth understands that it's not so easy to sell a home in a day. So they will go ahead and grant you Medicaid so long as your home is put up for sale. It needs to be listed. And then also Medicaid has the right to put a lien on that home. So say you're in the nursing home, your home is listed, it didn't sell yet, and now Medicaid is paying out $6,000 a month. They have the right to go ahead every month and put a $6,000 lien on that home until it sells.
Okay. Wow.
But yeah, there are other scenarios where a home can be exempt. Sometimes if a child was taking care of their parent for 2+ years, when I mean take care, I mean that they were a true caregiver,
Right.
not that the child was working from 9 to 5 and came home and fixed dinner for mom.
Right.
They truly weren't able to work because they were caring for their mom or dad. Sometimes Masshealth would allow that child to keep that home if they were there for 2+ years, if their address on their license is the same as that address. So there are other scenarios, but like I said, we'll try to keep it surface level and simple for right now.
Yeah. Right.
So helpful. Now, are life insurance policies counted as a resource?
Okay, so life insurance policies can also get complicated. So there's 2 different types of life insurance policies. There is something called a term policy, which means that there is no cash value. There's only a death benefit. So you cannot cash out that policy. Chances are, if you have a term policy, you're paying a monthly premium still every month. Sometimes you're not, but for the most part, you probably still are. So the term policy has no cash value. That's not counted as an asset. It's 100% exempt because, again, we're going back to what we defined as an asset is something that you can actually cash out. Here, you can't cash out that term policy. There's another policy called a whole policy or a life policy. Those usually have or always have a cash value. So it really doesn't go on the cash amount. Medicaid looks at the face amount. Okay, if anybody looks at their policy, they'll see on the initial contract, so to speak, a face amount. And if that face amount is $1,500 or above, it's a counted asset. So that life insurance policy would need to be cashed out. What some people do is they take that life insurance policy and instead of cashing it out, they would sign it over to a funeral home as a prepaid funeral,
Right.
which we'll get into soon of what's allowable expenses and all that. But the answer to your question is the term policy is not a counted asset. The whole policy is a counted asset if the face amount is $1,500 or above.
Okay.
Now,
Makes
if
sense.
the face amount is $1,200, you can have 10 of them. They don't equal up. In other words, each life policy is looked at separately. So when I say that you can't have a life insurance policy with a face amount of $1,500 or above, you can have 10 of them that have a face amount of $1,000, and they'll all be exempt.
Wow.
It goes policy by policy.
Interesting. And you touched on the spend down. Could
Okay.
you explain that for people?
Sure. Okay. So the spend down is really gets pretty. Everybody has a different definition of what spend down is. And when I ask people what spend down, like, what do you mean? Spend down your money. And that's really what it is. But in the healthcare world, the terminology of spend down is really used to define that your final phase prior to you being eligible for Medicaid. So it may be, you have $30,000 left, you may have $100,000 left, and then you're in your spend down mode.
Okay.
So yeah, that's really what people refer to as spend down.
And then there's rules about gifts, amounts, and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the spend down really begins. Like I said, the terminology of spend down, most people say, is your final phase. But the question is, when does spend down begin?
Yeah, because there must be a look back.
Exactly, right. So we'll get into that now. So we mentioned before the asset limit is $2,000. So let's just use John as an example. He's heading towards Medicaid. He looks at his accounts today. He's got $1,900 in there. So now he's financially eligible for Medicaid. But it's not as simple as going to the Medicaid office and say, hey, look, I have $1,900, give me Medicaid.
Right.
So Medicaid says, okay, that's great that you have $1,900, but how'd you get there? How do I know that 3 months ago you didn't have $150,000, you gave it out to your children and your grandchildren, and now you're coming over to me and asking me for Medicaid? And that's why Medicaid has what's called a 5-year look back. In order for them to determine that you truly qualify for Medicaid and not, like I said, just gave away all your money and now coming to me for Medicaid, they have that 5-year look back where they want to see all of your financial statements, all of your financial accounts. So you're talking about putting together 5 years worth of statements from all your checking accounts, your savings accounts, money markets, stocks, bonds, annuities, life insurance policies. Like
So
I
just
said,
a little bit of light
anything-
paperwork.
A little light paperwork, exactly. And we'll get into the challenges of getting that together.
That's where
a
you
little
guys
later.
come in, I think.
Yes, absolutely. We could definitely help with that. But yeah, it's a little bit of work, or a lot of bit of work, and it's a lot of tedious work because it's not only about getting the documentation and bringing it to Medicaid. Medicaid also wants to see now, where did that money go? Where did it come from? Where did it go? Why did it come from there, and why did it go there? So we have many people that say, oh, well, I'm all set because Mom never threw out a piece of paper in her life. We have 25 boxes of paper sitting in the garage. We have everything that Masshealth is going to ask for. And the answer to that is that's great. You probably have all your documentation, but it's also extremely important to have all the verifications, which means presenting to Medicaid where this money came from, where it went to, and making sure that it was spent on the individual. Because you asked me what spend down, and what could your money be used on while you're spending down. The answer to that really is, the rule of thumb is that your funds can only be spent on the applicant, okay, that the individual that's applying for Medicaid, or the community spouse. And that's really what Medicaid is looking for here, because they're going to go through all your transactions, and if they see a $5,000 withdrawal and they don't know where it's going, you need to provide that verification as showing, oh yes, that $5,000 went to my daughter because my daughter paid for something for me a year ago and now I'm paying her back. But you need to prove that to Medicaid. They're not just going to take that for an exactly. You're guilty until proven innocent.
So great things to spend, like funeral expenses. Like what a great
Right. So
gift
the
to
question
give
is,
your
what is a Medicaid allowable expense?
Yes.
Is anything is that's for the benefit of the applicant or the applicant's spouse. So for example, a prepaid funeral is really a no-brainer because we all know there's two definite things in life. There's taxes and death.
Right.
And unfortunately, everybody's going to die one day, right?
Right.
So if you don't pay, if you're spending down, if you have $50,000 in your pocket right now, you're no longer looking on how am I going to save that. You want to look at it, how am I going to utilize these funds the best way possible that's going to benefit me in the best way. And one of that is a prepaid funeral, because if you don't pay for it now, your child is going to have to pay for it after you pass away. So Medicaid allows that. It's a Medicaid allowable expense. Other things have, for example, you can pay to be in assisted living. You can pay to be in a nursing home. You can pay a company like Senior Planning Services to take care of your Medicaid application. Those are all things that are for the benefit of the applicant.
Great.
Makes sense. That makes sense. And now, if people are spending down and let's say they do find something that was not an eligible expense, is there penalties, or what? Can you talk a little bit about what a penalty is?
Sure. So Medicaid is going through that 5-year look back. Anything that doesn't have the proper verifications, in other words, showing exactly where that came from, where it went to, and providing the proof that it was for the benefit of the applicant or the spouse, they're going to mark that off, and at the end of them going through everything, they're going to tally that all up. So say they have $50,000 worth of transactions that they don't have an explanation for. They're going to say, okay, John, we'll give you Medicaid. However, you're not getting Medicaid for that first $50,000. So for example, if Medicaid was reimbursing the facility, the nursing home, $10,000 a month, you're not going to have a pay source for the first 5 months until it equals that $50,000. So that's why it's so important to make sure that not only do you have all the documentation that you need, but you're also providing all that verification, because Medicaid is not running to approve you. they're looking for every way to deny you. They're looking for every way to impose those penalties. The less money that they have to pay out, the better it is for them.
Yeah. All right, so I think that's maybe when your organization and the services you provide can really help people when it comes to going through this process and this journey. So can you just talk a little bit about what happens with the income once the application process begins, or does it start with them? Do they go to you? Can you just share a little bit about
I'd love
that process?
for everyone to hear how you guys fit into all this.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll answer just that first question about income. What happens to someone's income when they do apply for Medicaid? So if they're in a skilled nursing facility, starting from the first day that they need Medicaid, so let's just say they need Medicaid effective October 1st, November 1st, whatever it may be, that income is due to the facility that you're at. So if you have a $1,000 income, again, we're talking about a single individual because spouses, it can vary. Sometimes the spouse in the community can keep some of the applicant's income.
Okay.
But let's just say the bill in the nursing home's $6,000. Medicaid says you pay $1,000, we'll pay the other $5,000.
Okay.
But there's two exceptions to that. There's something called P&A, Personal Needs Allowance, which I believe is $72.50 that the applicant can keep on a monthly basis to do whatever they want with, do their hair, buy candy, whatever they would like. And then they could continue to pay their secondary insurance. So if they have a secondary besides their Medicare and besides their Medicaid that they're paying $240 a month for, they could continue to do that.
Okay.
We at Senior Planning Services, the first way that we really fit in here is we provide everybody, regardless of their situation, whether they have $0 left and they're not going to be able to utilize our services, or whether they still have $300,000 and it's too early for them to, utilize our services, is we offer everybody a free Medicaid education and consultation.
Which you almost just did, I feel like.
Well, yeah, I mean.
A little more personalized.
Exactly,
yeah.
Correct. We did a little bit of that, but when we provide.
Everyone's situation's so unique and
exactly.
different.
So when we're
that
providing that free consultation, we're not just taking out a piece of paper and rambling off the Medicaid rules and guidelines to you. We're going in depth into your situation. We're getting a good understanding of what has been going on over the past 5 years financially. Where has the money been going? What's your loved one's situation? And we're really giving you a clear idea and clear direction of what needs to be done in order for your loved one to be eligible and get Medicaid. So that's the first step, and I cannot express the importance of individuals getting educated. It's the most important thing. And just to give you a quick example, I got a phone call on Thursday from a woman that's her husband's in assisted living, running out of money, and she was literally crying to me on the phone that she's not going to have enough money to live, and her income is only $700. Her husband's income is close to $4,000. She is relying on his income to live, and so many people told her that she can't get any of his income. And I corrected that for her immediately. I said, you can get at least a total of about $2,100, maybe even $3,100. So that immediately, just from 5-minute conversation, she was already put at ease a little bit from the situation. So, there's so much information out there about Medicaid. There's so much wrong information out there. People, hear bits and pieces. This is your opportunity to get a free consultation. Well, it's free. It doesn't cost you any money. You can ask as many questions as you want, and we'll go through everything for you. Wow. If you want to get that free consultation, you can call our toll-free number is 1-855-S-PLANNING. And like I said, we'll be happy to talk to you and go through everything with you. Beyond that free consultation, once we're done, giving you that consultation, if you are in a situation where we feel that it's time for you to apply, we'll offer you our services, which is, if you would like to move forward, we'll send down a Medicaid specialist to come down and meet with you, whether you want to meet in your home or if their loved one is in assisted living, like the Bridges, we'll come down there. And all we ask them to bring is whatever documentation they have. So if mom has one little envelope and all she has is her driver's license and that's it, that's fine. Once you retain Senior Planning Services, you get an assigned case manager. Every single one of our clients have an assigned case manager to them, so they know the communication is there, the customer service is there. We understand families are going through a tough time. There's a lot going on.
They don't want to deal with 20 different people.
They don't want to deal with 20 different people. They don't want to deal with people being curt with them or short with them. We make sure our case managers are not only doing a fantastic job, but also giving the families the customer service that they're looking for. So once you retain our services, we assume the full responsibility to do everything. We'll gather all the bank statements that are needed, all the verifications, birth certificates, death certificates, whatever is needed for the Medicaid application is 100% on us to do for you. We also have a placement department. So many families have their loved ones in an assisted living facility, which don't take Medicaid or Masshealth. We have a placement department that can help those families transition from assisted living to a skilled nursing facility. We have many families that come to us where they think they have to leave the assisted living 6 months before they need Medicaid. That's not true. They don't have to. We can help them stay there longer, make sure the application's in play, make sure all the ducks are in a row, and then transition them when they have maybe 1 month left. And the level of care, the quality of life for them, I'm sure, is better in that assisted living. They much rather stay there longer. So, the bottom line is I can't stress enough the importance of getting educated, just so you understand that when somebody's in a crisis, the worst thing is not knowing what you're supposed to do.
Right.
When you get that education, at least now you know what has to be done. Whether you're going to use senior planning, you're going to try to do it on your own, whatever it is, you have the clear information now that you're looking for.
Right. People panic and then they don't do anything, and then they're in an emergency situation and it's almost too late.
Too late,
you
right.
can't get it all together. Yep. And it's great what you mentioned before about this being an acceptable expense
Yes.
for your spend down.
Right.
So you can, when you're in that sort of gray area of having a little bit of money left, it's a great way to spend your money.
Absolutely.
But you go in eyes wide open because you've already had that free consultation. So
Exactly.
we were just like blown away by your organization, and I'm sad that I hadn't found it, but happy that we know you're out there now.
Yes. I'm happy we found you too. But yes, it's a Medicaid allowable expense, so it's coming out of your spend down.
Okay.
So the only difference between somebody who uses senior planning or somebody that doesn't use senior planning, if you use senior planning, you'll just be eligible for Medicaid a month earlier, but you don't have to take care of all the legwork. You don't have to deal with all that stress of dealing with all the
Daunting
financial institutions trying to get pension statements and life insurance, and
Right.
the list goes on and on and on. Whereas somebody who doesn't choose to use senior planning, yes, they'll be eligible for Medicaid a month later, but now they're left with this bag that says, I need to get my loved one Medicaid, which is
Right.
not a fun task.
Not fun. No,
not
having
at
watched
all.
people go through it, it really isn't. So.
Well, it has been wonderful having you on our show, and thank you so much for educating our audience just on, the senior planning services and what they can do to make this process a little bit easier. And we can't thank you enough for being here.
Thank you very much for having
Thanks.
me.
Thank
Really
you.
Good to
appreciate
see
it.
you.
Until the next time.